This last session really is to look at, I guess we've talked a lot today, well I say we, you've talked a lot today, about and all the hard work, talking about great innovation and what it could mean in the future in terms of helping patients with better outcomes. But I guess the reality is it only becomes that if we find a way of getting from the invention and early innovation to actually getting it scaled up and tested and taken to patients. So I'm delighted to have this esteemed panel to my left. Those of you who had looked at the program a couple of days ago would have realized I should have been Mike Ward doing this. Mike, unfortunately, for personal reasons, couldn't be here, but we have got his twin brother, who's almost as flamboyant with the same hairstyle. So I'm sure he'll keep us in track as being the wise owl he is. But Mike gave us some guidance on what he thought we should talk about, and I'll follow some of that and probably surprise the panel with things that weren't on the list at all, but just came to me as we went. But if that's okay. So I'm going to, in a moment, we'll move to the panel now and ask them to introduce themselves, but perhaps just to set the scene of thinking how do we then innovate and industrialize and some of the challenges. Give your take on where does invention finish and innovation start in this space? Because we fund a lot of basic research that gives us new things, but where do we then move into, when does innovation take over from research in that sense? So Cathy, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, I get to start, thank you. Cathy Tralau-Stewart, I'm Executive Director of the Milner Institute at University of Cambridge. I'm a pharmacologist by background. I've done a lot of taking projects from the lab to the clinic, from academia and industry. Now, invention versus, what was it? You had innovation. You know, my belief is that the whole process is innovation. Of course, invention kicks in, and I think the strict definition for me, and I know others would deny it, is actually that when you feel you have something that you can patent, it's invention. And these days, that's not targets. It's much further along. Everything else is innovation, and innovation carries on through to the clinic and possibly beyond.
Jane?
Yeah, okay, can you hear me okay? So I'm Jane Dancer. Actually, I kind of follow on from Cathy a bit because I work in companies where actually someone's done the hard work, like Cathy, in getting it out of academia. So there's often a company there. Currently, I sit on the board of 5 early-stage companies. They're all pre-seed, seed, maybe Series A. All of them are companies that have platform technologies, and they're using those technologies in some way or another, and we maybe come back later to what in some way or another means, to discover drugs which will then benefit patients somewhere down the line. Prior to this, I actually did have a proper job, work full-time at a company called F-Star, where we actually set up a funky business model for leveraging our platform there. And before that, I had a mixture of roles, both in big pharma and in biotech, in business development, so deal making. So coming back to the question about invention versus innovation, I'm with Cathy a bit on this one. I'm going to be even more extreme because I think actually, yeah, if you file a patent, you need to prove utility. So it's more than just an idea. It's an idea which has some sort of use and benefit. But I would say sometimes when you're thinking about your patent strategy, you don't actually patent right at the beginning. You might wait for a bit. And therefore, actually, I'd say that innovation maybe starts even earlier than when you file your first patent. So right back. So see where you go on that.
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Veronica and I work for LifeArc. LifeArc, for whom might not be familiar, is a self-funded medical research charity. And yes, I'm representing here the therapeutic platform team, so our antibody discovery and humanization capabilities that we can offer to partners with a convenient business model in order to translate that innovation to that next stage of development in order that gets closer to patients. So coming back to the innovation versus invention, yeah, I agree with my colleagues here on the panel. However, I think that sometimes, in invention, I would say something novel is a novel discovery. Let's say, as an example, I would say, let's say in academia, they will discover a novel target, a novel pathway. However, it's an innovation, which is part of the development process when then has a real use, as Jane mentioned, in the sense that is commercially viable, is addressing something that really the market needs. So you are thinking about translating that something in a product. So let's say that target as a therapy that then can, let's say, make impact into patient or into a certain disease. So this is my view around invention and innovation. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. I'm Claire Thompson. I'm Chief Exec of Agility Life Sciences. We are an award-winning formulation development CDMO. Every day we have got to be innovative because we work with badly behaved molecules. They're all badly behaved, and turning them into products that give them the best chance of success. I think invention is where you put that marker in the sand of this is novel, hopefully has benefit in the future. And innovation is every day after that, because you can't predict how these molecules are going to work, whether your medical device is appropriate. So you have to be innovative at every step after that, either from a scientific or a business model, or a regulatory perspective, to ensure that your invention can become something that is therapeutically beneficial.
Thank you. I'm delighted to have such an experienced panel. Actually, know much more about this topic than I do, so that's always reassuring as the moderator. Just thinking through the sort of things that enable that scale up and that innovation to happen along the pipeline, irrespective of where you file the patent, or is that sporadic as opposed to innovations ongoing? There's three sort of the key elements, I guess, when I think about it. There's money, because someone has to pay for this to happen in one way or another. There's technology, and whether there's technologies that can help, or is the technology scalable, and how you solve some of those badly behaved molecules and things that don't do what they should do. And then there's a people side. Yeah. And they all sort of interrelate to some degree, because I guess this is a partnership thing in most models. If I think about the money side at this point, or the resource maybe I should use rather than money. We've heard, I guess, so many sessions, and quite correctly, the last couple of years has been pretty hard, actually, if you're trying to raise the traditional route of start company, raise funding, raise another round of funding, and get through value inflection. That's challenging for all sorts of reasons, and that's geopolitics, it's world events, it's investors getting maybe risk averse and going later stage, as we've seen announced this week with Syncona. All of those things start to make it challenging for money, but you're all being involved in various times in different models of how to move innovation forward. I just thought maybe, Cathy, you talk a little bit about the Milner and how that facilitates that transition from discovery and the academic base into the companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know the Milner Institute, we're a pretty unique model in academia, but anywhere really. And we have three pieces to our model, which is a consortium, and that's a big pharma consortium and an affiliate consortium. Big pharma at the moment, we've got 9 big pharma companies, and we've got 80 affiliate companies involved in our consortium and ecosystem. We also do some research, and we also have an incubator. So pretty unique model for academia. So the aim of the consortium is that we have an overarching agreement which actually deals with a lot of the contracting issues, the IP issues. They get different options that they can take on the IP. And the idea is that they actually are looking for certain types of project across the Cambridge ecosystem. So they create challenges. We look for partners within the academic space for that. And we help them build a project together. Now, everyone in this room knows that actually drug discovery isn't easy. No one person can do drug discovery on their own and take it all the way to the patients. I do not believe that's the case. It might have been once, but it certainly isn't now. So we need this city of people, city of experts, and I genuinely believe that the future, and actually currently, you have a number of different organisations that help along this pathway. Academics, maybe a startup, maybe a license to pharma, but pharma is probably the major one that takes things into patients. And so the trick is partnering them, and that's what the Milner does. We help to build the right expertise around a project, and then hopefully a project becomes more than a project and moves forward in the pharma companies onwards to patients. That's what we try and do. So we're very much a matchmaker, actually.
Thank you. Maybe if I can skip along to Veronica to talk about the LifeArc approach of supporting that translational research, also from that early stage.
Yeah, so LifeArc, I would say, is in a really unique position in the translational ecosystem. So we are a self-funded not-for-profit, so we are really unique from this perspective. We are a research organization, we have a venture arm, so we can really help to bridge that gap, which we refer always to help that promising research coming from innovators to get to that next stage of development. We do that in many different ways. I can spend hours here talking about how many ways LifeArc can help. However, of course, there is the funding component, as I mentioned, equity investment through our venture arm, funding in form of in-kind contribution, grants in targeted translational challenges. We provide our expertise, and what is really unique, of course, I might be biased because I'm part of that team, but is also our business model around our antibody discovery and development platform. So we have this great expertise, we have a great track record of success where we humanize antibodies, and now here we are really making this available to innovators so that they can translate their research to the next stage. We can do that in collaboration, as Cathy was mentioned. Collaboration is key, you can't do everything alone, so we really value collaboration and complementing expertise. So here we're complementing our expertise in antibody and really translate their promising research to that next stage, deliver a lead candidate. And I think this is pretty unique because we bear the costs, so we share those risks with the partner in order that they can get to that next stage and can attract investments, since, of course, the funding ecosystem, the funding landscape is a bit challenging. And so I would say that this is really unique. We can help and support in many different ways to bridge that gap. So we see ourselves as enabler in the ecosystem, let's say.
And then just to touch on those, once you've intervened or supported and collaborated in those early stage projects, what tends to happen to the projects beyond? How far do they go before LifeArc exits? What happens? Do they get?
So in terms of our antibody platform, that sits in our early stage expertise. However, recently our focus is also shifting towards supporting also the later stage translation and clinical trials. Concerning the antibody platform, so essentially we will start, let's say, from the target of our partner. We will then offer a full antibody discovery campaign so that to hand over to the partner a lead candidate. So then it's up to the partner to then bring that forward. They own the IP, the commercial control. So we, let's say, in some way de-risk that project at that stage in order that then they have that lead candidate and they can move forward. So yeah, at a lead candidate stage in those cases. However, as I mentioned, we can also support certain later stages in focus areas in that case, so rare disease, antimicrobial resistance.
And if I may, I might come back to the whole stakeholders in the CRO space, Claire, and how that plays into this ecosystem. But Jane, you've been involved in a number of companies and still are in a number of companies, perhaps not working in some sort of consortium like the Milner or with a LifeArc, but I suppose what some would have considered a more traditional route of spin-out venture capital, but into some really innovative business models as well. Just wonder if you could explain a bit around how you've experienced that process of being able to scale in those companies.
Yeah, so first thing to say, I specialise in platform companies. So I've never worked for companies who are purely looking at one programme. So in terms of innovative models, I think the thing that really interests me is what business model you should adopt if you've got a platform. So you've got a platform, there are many things you can do with it, which is actually a blessing but also a curse. And at one end of the spectrum, you could decide that you're going to purely provide your platform as a service, you're going to make revenues, you're not going to raise a lot of capital, it's low risk, you're probably never going to be hugely valuable, and there are some good success stories based on that. Sometimes I think people are a bit sniffy about that model, but there's a lot to be said for it, because if you really want to allow your platform to enable drugs which are going to reach as many patients as possible, throw it open, you know, almost sort of an open access type thing if we look at what's happening in tech. And I think what we just heard about is you know, you've got your antibody platform and you're making it available to people and supporting that way. At the other end of the spectrum, you could say, I'm going to use my platform purely to make my own drugs, you know, the sort of model that Arch Ventures used to back. And therefore, I'm not going to dilute it, I'm not going to get distracted, it's all about getting a pipeline out of it. I'm going to raise an awful lot of capital, I'm going to take on a lot of risk, but at the end I'll be worth billions. And then in the middle is where most of us end up playing, where we actually use our platform to develop our pipelines, but at the same time, we actually partner it. And that way we get more shots on goal, we get it used more broadly, and we get money coming back in validation and all of that good stuff. So I'm quite intrigued. I mean, the companies I've worked for in the past have generally tended to be, you know, right in the middle. I think these days with capital being so scarce, there's a lot to be said for going down maybe towards the lower risk, low capital end, and actually thinking more about whether you don't develop your drugs so far, you partner them earlier, and perhaps you don't even develop drugs at all, you let someone else do the hard work, because your kind of your core competence is in your platform. And I see companies struggle with making that transition if they're really platform minded. So I think interesting things going on there in terms of where we play. And then the other thing you mentioned is one risk you have is if you go down this model where you've got a platform which is, you know, really powerful, and you develop drugs from it, when you exit the company, if you do it to a sale to pharma, they're more interested in the drugs. There's much more value in those than the platform. And there are plenty of examples locally of companies that have been acquired and then the platform's been shelved. And you don't get the full value because it's almost like a buy one, get one free program platform, throw it all together, sell it off. So what we did at F-Star to actually address that was to actually, and it's been done, I think, fairly broadly now, so you're smiling, Lynn, smiling you heard this, is that we actually kept the platform in one company and spun programs into asset-centric vehicles and then sold them off one by one to pharma. And that way you can get, in theory, the full value. Now, if you follow the F-Star story, you know it wasn't quite that simple because we ran that for a while, but in the end, because they did a listing on NASDAQ, the whole lot had to be put back together again. And so it made a lot of lawyers very, very rich. But it's an interesting model. So I think what really intrigues me, and I'm sure there's experience here amongst all of you, is if you have a platform, what's the best way to monetize it? And perhaps more importantly, what's the best way to actually get it to patients? And the two might not necessarily be the same. So, yeah.
And Claire, then quite often we think about academia, we think of the biotechs and pharma, but from a CRO perspective, you come in to deal with, like you said, the badly behaved molecules. You know, I'd like to think there were some that were better behaved than others, shall we say, to give us all hope. But how do you see that from a CRO, a service provider's role in that, knitting that ecosystem together? Because often the expertise sits with you to be able to move these things.
I think it's absolutely critical, and I think there's nods along the panel. Not one organisation, certainly not one person, can take a molecule all the way through to market, and neither they should. It takes a village to raise a child, and it certainly takes a village to, you know, get an asset all the way through. And I think that finding the right organisations and certainly the right people to work with is critical, no matter what part of the arena that you're in. You know, we see mostly badly behaved molecules, some are nicely behaved, coming at us from out of academia, out of SMEs, out of large pharma as well. They all have the same problems. So they've got limited time, limited data, limited amounts of material, and very big problems to solve. You know, they need to get to that next pivotal point exceptionally quickly to answer the key problems. And the last panel talked about that. What are the actual key problems that will allow you to get to that next inflection point or that next investment? So we come at it with start with an end in mind. What is it that the client needs to see? Where do they need to get to with this molecule and with this product? So is it GLP tox? Is it phase 1? Is it phase 2? And look at it as a future-proof. And how do we future-proof this formulation as fast as we possibly can to enable the client to get through these next critical studies, but also to get them to their endpoint. And in doing that, we need to be innovative. We need to have the right heads on this. But we've been pushed in the last few years about our business model as well. Well, why don't you have a platform? Why don't you take your knowledge on lipid nanoparticles and actually patent some of that? Well, we could do, but that would then limit us over here. And I've had my fingers burnt in the past by, when I was on the other side of the fence, being head of R&D at a virtual biotech, having to pay out license fees to organizations. And it really, it stifles the relationship. It stifles the how quickly you can go with the product. So we won't do that. So we've made the strategic decision to go fee for service, not to have our own platforms, not to have our own assets. That may be to the detriment financially to where we might end up in the future, but it means that we can go quickly on behalf of our clients. We can go quickly because they don't have the time to mess around. And sometimes, if you make the conversations too complicated, then the contract negotiation takes longer than the project does. So, we're having to think innovatively, not only just how are we going to tame this badly behaved molecule, and how are we going to put these two APIs into this subcutaneous formulation that will deliver over 7 days, but how are we going to make something that is good for now, good for the future, and enables us to establish a great working relationship and get us all to where we need to. We're all patients at the end of the day. I don't want to be negotiating a contract for 18 months when the investment cycles that the companies are working with mean that they might run out of money in 9 months. We don't want that.
I think that's one of the things, I guess, hearing the variety of business model types of relationships and collaborations and like the business model, I don't think you ever differentiate excellence on the basis of business model. I think that's a commercial choice. And I think that's, for me anyway, why would you not make that choice in your own best interest and in what you want to do? But I'm just thinking over where sort of funding is cyclical, as you touched upon, Claire, and these things come and go. But where it has been sort of a prolonged, tough environment now for a while, have you noticed any difference in the expectations of the partnerships you've been involved in and collaborations of what people expect on either side of that table? I don't know if anyone wants to have this wasn't on the list of questions.
I'm happy to start that one with a slightly different take on it, possibly. So obviously what I see is what pharma are looking for. And my opinion, and over actually quite a bit of US and UK experience, is that while some pharma are still prepared to actually invest in basic research, that's becoming rarer. What they actually want is things that they can see in their pipeline within heading for their pipeline in a 3 to 5 year time slot. So actually, they're interested in our startups more than they are the academic research. And it's a bit of a sad view because I need them to do both. But that's what I'm seeing.
And anyone else?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, what pharma really want, of course, is a phase 3. No, a kind of,
And I can't give you
that. Asset, that's what they really want. But actually, I think, interesting. So in terms of expectations, looking at it from the biotech side, I think there where capital's short and you really need to, for instance, validate your platform, pharma collaborations become even more important for generating the data. I think pharma these days is a lot more open to allowing you to be able to share, and obviously within reason, you don't take their IP, but actually are more, realistic in terms of actually enabling biotechs, and the sort of things I'm seeing in contracts point to that. So expectations. The only thing I would say is while pharma, and if I go right back, pharma, it was not invented here. Innovation is done within the company. Of course, we have to remind ourselves about those times, and they are so much more open to innovation. The fact that you've got a consortium of pharma companies all working together and sharing. Yeah. Not necessarily well known for sharing, but now I think they can see that sometimes by joining forces, it can actually accelerate. So I think that's a really, really positive.
I think it is really unusual with our Milner Consortium that the sort of conversations we have across companies around a particular therapeutic area, a model, an approach, are really fun. And I think, we learn a lot from them, they learn a lot from them, and actually they are surprisingly open to have them conversations.
Yeah, that's good.
And Veronica or Claire?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of expectations and collaboration, of course, I believe that collaboration model have to be flexible as possible in order, if we want to achieve more and accelerate that pathway to the market. And I would say that it's important also to reinvent sometimes the roadmap. The traditional roadmap, unfortunately, doesn't work for all the type of therapies, for all the type of diseases. So it's important to be open to reinvent that roadmap and be flexible in the type of collaboration that we are seeking for, more flexible in the terms of the models. That's why we have such a diverse type of collaboration model that we can offer. However, what we should be careful is really who we want to partner with, and if that type of partnership can add more value to what we are trying to achieve. So it's important to have that complementary expertise, that shared mission. So I think that is the type of expectation from a collaboration.
I think the ask from an investor perspective is getting greater as well, whether that's non-dilutive funding or VC. We've seen a few of the companies that we work with, they've had to map out not just their phase 1 clinical endpoints, but what's phase 2 going to look like? Who are your strategic partners going to be in the future, and have you spoken to them? What are their expectations? Who are you going to sell this into? On the way out to one of our US-based clients, their lead investor stipulated that they would only invest if they then took on an additional AI arm and had earmarked a company for them to buy. So, it's getting more extreme.
And I guess that pressure sort of brings that out, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It really does focus on, show me the end goal here. And in that, when you think, I sort of start off saying about those three things of sort of money, people and technology, but thinking about the technology areas, the other thing that occurs to me with this is we're getting many more technologies sort of converging into the space to enable this to be more efficient, more productive for sort of bio-dollars spent, if you like, on R&D. But is it feasible, I guess, for companies, if you're going to use those technologies, whether they're novel formulations or whether it's patient stratification and AI, is it feasible to build that within a company, or are we going to see that more and more through partnership and access? How to actually get the technologies that allow you to scale up?
You see companies that are entirely built around a technology, but somewhere along the line they're going to need other technologies, and that's where the ecosystem and collaboration works. That's where bringing in CROs, bringing in other experts, other technologies, because in my opinion, it depends which part of the program you're trying to get from and to. But if you're trying to get to patients or anywhere near patients, you're going to have to use lots of technologies, and it's very rare that one company has it, unless you're a big pharma, but usually even big pharma are getting them in from elsewhere too, so,
And for me, it sort of reinforces the importance of ecosystems and critical mass of ecosystem and diversity. But I don't know, I mean, Clay, we talked about innovation quite often, and, it seems like it always comes out of research and that, but in things that we don't really talk about that much, in at least a lot of our events, we don't think about the later stage things of formulation and development and packaging, all that sort of side of it. I mean, I'm guessing innovation must happen right the way along this chain, right?
Oh, it has to. Yeah, absolutely. And packaging's not very sexy, but innovation in packaging has to happen from a...
Maybe that's the innovation it needs.
It could, well, from a clean and green perspective, if we're looking at driving towards carbon neutrality, then the amount of packaging that we use has got to be modified, because there's so much waste in that. So yeah, there's innovation all the way along that kind of supply chain. But what you're saying about whether you can bring other platforms in or bring other technologies in, it is possible to do it. Some people do it very well, but in order to collaborate and to cluster, you need an exceptional culture. And no matter the size of the organisation that you have, that has to be at the forefront of your mind is, building, establishing and maintaining a phenomenal culture so that you can continue to get not the most, but the best out of your people. And the best innovation will come from that.
I know we've spoken many times before about how important the culture and fit of people is in this. And obviously when I think about how is this product going to get to patients, actually scaling the company to be big enough or advanced enough to operate and take a product far enough it's ready for patients is no mean feat. So just think, based on your respective experiences, what kind of works well and what doesn't work well in that transition from being an early stage, highly innovative and nimble company as it grows and processes become front and center, and even more so the further you go with regulators. From your experience, what works well and what doesn't work when you try and build that transition? Do you have to change leadership, or does the culture have to change within the company?
So yeah, shall I start? I think, as I said earlier, I think often one of the things I've been intrigued by working for these platform companies for so many years is it is a jump from being a company which tinkers with a platform to actually, it's like kind of tuning the engine to actually driving the car and generating drugs. Analogy I often use is one of the most scary things a company has to do is decide which target it's going to work on. So target selection process is, it's almost like going to the casino and putting all your chips on one number on the roulette table and just hoping it comes up. So, and people who like tinkering the platforms probably don't like that level of risk and working with the uncertainty that we do when we go into programs. So I think, yes, absolutely, it does take a different type of experience, a different mindset. Not to say that people can't follow it right the way through, but if you look at most companies, there will be a succession of leadership which is appropriate to the stage that company is actually at. So I think the only thing then, sort of talking about the big picture, but actually in terms of how you actually manage that transition, one thing I've learned is companies need to be quite disciplined from the very start about how they manage their data and their stuff. I see it more from the sort of corporate governance side. It's very difficult to collect up a load of disparate documents when you suddenly go out to raise money if they're sort of scattered in people's inboxes throughout the organisation. So actually having some really good sort of hygiene about how you actually file stuff, store it, and some of it's going to be critical when it comes to data and you're scrabbling around trying to find that lab book or something. So I think instilling that, and I'm sure with the early stage companies that you guys work with, you keep an eye on that, because it becomes, it's easier if you can start right, but it's not normally the sort of thing that really fires up the sort of people that are spinning companies out.
That's what I was thinking, it's a sort of a very different mindset to doing those things.
Yeah.
But, I think, anything else want to comment?
Yeah, I believe that, of course, to translate from early stage to later stage and get to the market, that is a collective effort, and is that what we are saying all here today. And but it's also important, let's say, to engage at an early stage with those key stakeholders that contribute to the developmental pathway, even if you are not the one, that startup is not the one bringing forward that potential drug. However, it's important to engage with these stakeholders from early on so that they put you in the right direction, in the sense that, let's say, you start to talk with clinicians, you start to talk with payers, you start to talk with patients, understand what is important for them, and if you are really addressing what is important for them. And in that case, that will allow you to reshape that direction and put you, let's say, on the right path. So yeah, it's a collective effort, but it's important to engage early on in those conversations with those key stakeholders that contribute to that development.
I guess, Cathy, not so much, well, maybe with the Milner now, but your previous roles with Takeda and bringing innovation in, was that, how far down the track did you look when you were looking at those?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, Takeda looked at across the piece, but the group that I was in, and probably their biggest investment at the time, External Innovation, were looking for early innovative science that was going to be the next big thing. That's the truth of it, prime editing, that sort of thing. So they were going for that, definitely. Now, if any of you follow Takeda, you will know that didn't really work for them, And I think there are other examples of this. Other companies found the same issue, is that the level of investment and the time you have to invest in it doesn't fit with your pipeline need. And so on the whole, that's a difficult approach. But equally, you know, for the academics trying to found their own companies at the beginning, and I still see this, is a lot of academics want to build all the knowledge that they require and all the capabilities that they require. And to be honest, they can't do it. So, you know, that partnership, collaboration bit is so important. Bringing in expertise from elsewhere is so important. And I think that's essential.
I guess thinking about the partnership side of that and realising who else you need to have on board. But to some degree, Claire, you do a lot of science communication type support and engaging public and work from schools upwards and various roles. I guess, you know, key stakeholders at the end of the day is, you know, do clinicians and patients want this? And so where in the process does that engagement start? You know, when you look at other tech sectors, it would be like, is there a gap in the market for this? Are there customers who would pay for this? I mean, where do you start that in such a long development cycle like biotech?
I think the earlier the better, because it's not just about the gap in the market, it's the market for the gap. You can have a great idea, but nobody wants to buy it, and that's part of the, you know, the value proposition that you've got to determine extremely early on. So I think it's probably never too early to start talking to clinicians, start talking to patients about what they need and how best you can deliver it. But I want to echo Cathy's point about, you know, acknowledging as a leader the attributes that you have and the attributes that you don't have. So be authentic and be honest with yourself, and your culture will change within your organisation. Probably every factor of 3. You go, 3, 9, 27. We're going to get to the limitation of mind multiplication very, very soon. But I think always being aware of who you are and where you are as a leader, and being in a position to make the decision. And Jane, I completely agree with you. You've got to have your documentation in place at all times, because there'll be days where you've got to make a decision of whether you scale, you sell, you stop. And having the data to make those decisions of, have we made the right target? Have we made the right product? Are the clinical data correct and appropriate? Do we continue? Do we scale this if we get the investment in, or do we sell it on? And you've always got to be you've always got to be prepared to make that decision. Do you stop? Do you scale? Do you sell?
Yeah, you just got to choose what you back and go with it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, I was just saying the stakeholder groups, that if it's going to get to patient, the clinicians need to want it, and we're happy to use it, and the patients will call for it. But then you've got the payers in the middle. When do they start to influence research?
I would say right at the beginning again. It comes down to that early understanding of, okay, what does this product look like? What sector is it targeted at? And if you don't consider at that point that someone will pay for it, you run into problems. And the absolute examples of this are antibiotics and in the past, perhaps rare diseases, actually, is that there might not be a market out there. The payers won't pay for it. It leads to interesting conversations. So the sooner you actually grapple with that and understand where your product's going and who's going to pay for it, the better. I would say that for me, you shouldn't forget the opportunity that you start going this way to treat that disease, but there is a time where you say, actually, that target looks like it's interesting over here, and you need the flexibility to do that too.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I mean, so flexibility, but I think there should always be a line of sight through the patient.
Yes.
The patient from the very start. One mistake that some people have if they have a really exciting technology is you almost go out looking for a problem to solve rather than finding an unmet need. And you've got so always it should be, here's the need, and this is the solution, rather than here's the solution and we're going to find something to do with it. Oh yeah, that looks interesting. And I think if there's a very clear unmet need amongst patients, then the payers probably will follow. So we think more about making absolutely sure, knowing, what the problem is, what's out there that's solving it, and think broadly there, not just what's working against the same target as you are, but very, very broadly. What's coming through, of course, because it's going to be 10 years or so before your drug hits the market. And there are some very good, organisations who can help you with that, and it's worth investing in that, because without that, you're never going to raise any money.
I'm conscious of it's a pretty tight programme, and we could talk about lots of these things at length and not get to the bottom of some of them, and that means we don't have time for the questions from the audience, but that's what the networking is for too. Doesn't mean the conversation should stop at the end of a panel. Just to close out as we run up against time, I guess just to ask each of you what would spring to mind saying, what's the one common thing that you've looked at technologies, or whether it's platforms that have been scaled or whether it's assets that have gone all the way, what's the one success factor? If the key things are, there's a pattern here, the ones that get through this arduous journey, and quite rightly arduous, because you don't want things rushed into patients and so forth. Is there something you would point to and say, it must have this? And maybe we'll start with Claire at the fine.
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
I kind of felt like I'd put Cathy on the spot the first time.
By the time I get here, I'm in trouble.
No, so there was a word that keeps coming at me in the last few weeks, and it's fortitude. So we hear a lot about grit and about resilience and about the power of people, and I think at the moment, fortune comes with fortitude. So really digging in times of crisis and not letting it go to waste, making the best of things. And I think it's the people who have the war wounds and the wisdom that comes from being relentless in the ever blowing winds that is the life science sector over the last 20 years. So I think it is fortitude that leads to fortune, and will continue to do so.
Excellent. Veronica.
Yeah, so I would say there are many different factors that can contribute to that success in translation. So I would say that timing is important. It's important, as we mentioned, it's important to address an unmet need, and the timing is important in the sense that you might have a great discovery, but at that time the world might not be ready for it, or you just already lost that train. So it's important that you're addressing an unmet need at a time where that is needed. And I would say also sometimes for innovation it's important to have a champion, also, or two champions if we're talking about collaboration, in the sense that they are really trying to push that forward. They think about, believe about the potential of that innovation. That is very important, and are common factors that contribute to the success.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to follow on a bit from Claire. Fortitude, and the other one I can think of, and it's sort of, it follows, a lot of what we've been talking about with collaboration and having an open mindset. There's something about knowing what you don't know. Of course, there's always the unknown unknowns. Actually being aware that not one person, has got all the answers, and so that's what means that you should be going out and getting as much help, as much advice, which of course is where the ecosystems become so important. Why we're all here is we want to learn from each other, to talk to each other, to build those relationships. So I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay.
Cathy, final word.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things, but I think, the one thing that I feel is really important and doesn't always happen is clear to me, is that decisions are made along the way. So you're getting data, and by the way, that data could be marketing, it could be what the competitor's doing, and it could be real, data. And I think being able to make decisions, because chances are there's not one route through this to the clinic, but you're gonna have to make data and put your chips on the right bet. So make a decision is better than not to make a decision.
Absolutely.
I think that could echo in many things of current what's going on politically.
Good, yeah, you could.
So
Yeah.
I'm conscious we're up to time on this bit, but panel, I'd just like to thank you for sharing your thoughts into which I think really just reminds us all what we're trying to achieve in the end goal here, and that's get to patients. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.